Okay, so we're back with another module, and this module is rent to rent. All right, what it is, how it works, and everything surrounding it. And look, I know there's a lot of in-depth information and it's going quite fast, but this is why you've got the Google Docs and you can study it, take notes, and please ask questions in the community. Your questions will be answered, all right? But what I want to do right now is I want to explain to you the core foundations and fundamentals of rent to rent, all right? So whenever you visualize or speak about rent to rent, this is the process that you're understanding. I think too many people talk about everything that surrounds it and actually not what it is. Okay, so of course there's a lot of information that goes in and around rent to rent, but this is the process, right? So we spoke about many ways to rent a property, like ASTs and other corporations rent to renting a property so they could lease it to their staff. But in this case, we are using the rent to rent model to generate cash flow. All right. So the way this process works is we are going to rent a property off a landlord or an agent. Okay. And we are going to let or sublease that property back out to online travel agencies and corporations. And the whole reason we are doing this is to generate cash flow. Okay. So it's super easy, and it's in the name, rent to rent, rent to lease. All right, it doesn't need to be thought about in any other way. It is just you are renting a property to rent it back out. Simple as. Okay, so let's get into the core information of rent to rent. All right, so the purpose of this module is to understand what rent to rent actually is. By the end, you should clearly understand the rent to rent model, know the legal risks and requirements, understand the income structure, and be able to assess whether rent to rent is right for you or the landlord. Okay, so what is rent to rent? Rent to rent is where an individual, I say individual, but it's actually more likely going to be a company. So where a company leases a property from a landlord or an agent and sublets it for profit. Okay, super simple. The operator will pay the landlord a fixed rate, take responsibility for the management and the costs associated with running the property, and you will earn profit from the difference between income and the rent. I'll give you an example, okay? So if I rent a property as a corporation, as a business, for $1,200 per month, and my bills, my associated cost with running that property is £300, that will take my total to £1,500. If my overall income, my net income, is £2,500, that would make the difference, the net profit, £1,000 profit. Okay, super easy to understand, right? So how rent to rent works in practice: a commercial agreement between the operator and the landlord, usually a company, like I said, not an individual. I think it can be doable, but to be honest, if you're looking at scaling a business, there's just no point doing it as an individual, especially because of the tax implications and purposes anyway. So you will just be doing it as a company, often for a fixed term, 3 to 5 years. The reason why we do 3 to 5 years is because it might take you 6 to 12 months to generate profit. If you sign a year lease, then even if you make profit in 6 months, you're making 6 months of profit potentially to give the property back. Okay, so it's just not something that we're particularly interested in. So the operator pays the landlord X per month. The operator sublets the property as service accommodation, HMOs, or company lets. In our case, this is going to be serviced accommodation. All right, we're going to be subletting the property to contractors or holiday goers or people that are having renovations on their property. Okay, so we're going to be subletting it on a nightly rate for a price. The legal requirement: explicit landlord consent to sublet. That is super important. A lot of people think that subletting is illegal, and in some cases it may be if there's head lease restrictions or the mortgage restricts against it. However, if the landlord usually gives consent, this is perfectly legal. Okay, so correct agreements: management style or commercial lease agreements. So you're going to be doing a company let, and if you've signed on to our full course, then you will get all of the agreements for free, so you have no need to worry. Subletting clause clearly defined. All right, so you're just going to make it obvious that the landlord understands that what you are using the property for. Responsibilities clearly allocated. All right, so it's our responsibility to maintain the property standards. That's going to be in the contracts. All right, so no consent equals illegal subletting. That's where the common misconception is, right? Licensees versus tenant risk. We've already spoken about this, but essentially if you have a long-term tenant as an AST, then you are not running a service accommodation and you could run into some serious problems, all right? So we want to make sure that they're on excluded license agreements and not AST agreements. They are short-let agreements that exclude the tenant's rights, the guest's rights as a tenant, right? Similar to a hotel, very, very similar, this structure. Income potential and margins. Margins aren't huge. Some properties you may earn upwards of £2,000, all right? But a typical margin, a realistic margin, and I don't think enough people say this, is you're looking about 10 to 25%, okay? So some properties you may only earn £500 to £1,000, similar to a buy-to-let, but remember, we don't own these properties. It would be a very different story if we own these properties, but we don't own them. So we are making a 10 to 25% markup on a property we don't even own. If you can times that by 10, now you're making £5,000, £10,000 per month, all right? So poor operators overestimate profit and underestimate cost. We see this all the time. Everybody says that it's going to cost X amount, which is really small, and you're going to make X amount, which is really large, but it's just not realistic, okay? So you'd rather under-promise yourself and over-deliver on the results, all right? Common mistakes in rent-to-rent: no written landlord consent, overpaying rent, underestimating costs, like we just said, poor contracts, and treating it as passive, all right? So it can be passive, but at first you just got to be aware that you are going to be very hands-on. And of course, the better that you learn the business model, the better you'll be able to teach it in the future, thus allowing you to be hands-off, all right? So, but you're with us and you're going to get these good contracts, you're going to get this good understanding, you're going to get these realistic goals, and you're going to be perfectly safe. Okay, so of course, like anything, there's some risks associated with running it as a rent-to-rent. You could experience void periods, regulation changes, cost inflations, reputation damage if you're not operating properly. But these are just things that we have to take on board when we're doing a rent-to-rent. And if you do it properly, the risks are going to be minimalized. But like any market, there is always risks associated. So don't be scared of them. Just make sure that you're doing a proper job. Okay, so the key takeaway from this module, remember that rent-to-rent is very simple as a process, okay? You are renting a property from a landlord or an agent as a business, and you are subletting it out to other corporations or travel agencies for profit. Simple, okay? So rent-to-rent is a legitimate business model when all permissions are in place, numbers are conservative, and systems are solid. It's not a loophole. It's not a passive shortcut, and it's not a beginner strategy without support. But that being said, done correctly, rent-to-rent can be a huge money maker and a huge opportunity maker, and can 100% generate you enough cash flow like it has myself to leave your 9 to 5 and be financially free. Okay, so let's get to the